Hello and welcome to Classic Book Reviews with David. In this video I'll be discussing Early Science Fiction Tales 2, Science Fiction Before Verne and Wells, 1648 to 1844. Now, if you've seen my previous video on the first volume, you'll know that I've set up a publishing company called Firestone Books. And when I was setting it up, the first thing I wondered was, well, what am I going to publish? And I decided at the time to put together the earliest science fiction tales I could find. And originally I thought they'd only go back a couple of hundred years. And in fact, I discovered that science fiction has been around, at least 2,000 years. I won't say too much about the very earliest stories because that's covered in my first video. But instead, I'll be talking about this book, the second volume. So there are only 7 stories in the volume because there just wasn't the space to put in any more. 2 of which are excerpts and 5 are complete short stories. The first tale I'll be discussing is something called Comical Histories, which was written in 1648 by Cyrano de Bergerac. And it's a tale of a man who ends up going to the moon. How does he get there? Well, he's tied to some fireworks, to some rockets, and he's shot off into space. The funny thing is, there was a review, I think in the 1800s, and the reviewer said how absurd it was that a man should end up going to the moon by rockets, and he suggested that being pulled by a flight of birds might be a more sensible and realistic way of travelling there. Another interesting story in this volume, I'll only be discussing 3 stories in this video. The second I'm discussing, or will be discussing, is The Blazing World. And that's by Margaret Cavendish, the Duchess of Newcastle. The interesting thing about this particular book is that it's the first story, at least the first I'm aware of parallel dimensions. A very popular theme within science fiction, but she got there first, and it's about a person who travels to the North Pole, and when they get there they find themselves travelling through some sort of portal into a parallel dimension. The final story I'll talk about for this video, I'm sorry for keeping it so brief, but I like to keep my videos under 5 minutes, is Micromegas, and that was written it was published, I think, in 1751, I may be wrong, but mid-1700s. It was by Voltaire. And whereas up until that point, most aliens that were encountered always tended to be from the moon. They'd either come from the moon or a person had gone to the moon and met aliens there. Micromegas is different. It doesn't even talk about aliens coming from our solar system, from Mars or wherever. It goes beyond that and talks of aliens coming from an exoplanet, to give it its fancy modern term, or a planet beyond our solar system that orbits another star. So that's quite profound. And these aliens come from this distant star, and they come to Earth and observe the follies of mankind. I won't go through any more stories, but this volume, as mentioned in the title, covers science fiction before the likes of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. So it's still very early stuff, from the 1600s to the 1800s. I will put some links below where you can purchase the book if you want to, Volumes 1 and Volume 2. And you can always follow on Twitter and Facebook. And of course, I'd love you to subscribe. But thanks for watching. All the best.